We could have filled the venue several times over, I'm sure, and we're very grateful again to the organisers for wishing to retain the IHR as their venue. Because of the event's popularity, we will be filming and recording each of the sessions, and video and audio versions of today's proceedings will be available on the IHR website. We're also live tweeting the proceedings, and this has been done by my colleague Sarah Milligan from the IHR Digital Department. And your programme also includes details of the hashtag for today, Women's Historians. And if you tweet, we encourage you to highlight the central role played by King's Institute for Contemporary British History and the IHR. Because of the popularity of today's event, we can guarantee you an interested and enthusiastic audience for your social media commentaries. And you'll also find details of the Wi-Fi network and the password on your programme. Alana and Laura will say a little bit more shortly about each of the sessions this afternoon. Before handing over to Alana and Laura, I'd just like to say how much this afternoon's event and its subject has caught the attention of IHR staff and has been welcomed with interest and enthusiasm. One of the great attractions of today is that it promises to extend well beyond the 4 speaker sessions on the programme. Over the coming weeks, for example, there'll be a series of blog posts via the websites of the IHR and the School of Advanced Study on aspects of today's discussion and the historians it features. In the corridor outside this room, the IHR library staff have put together a display of publications by selected London women historians drawn from the library's collection. And if you haven't had a chance, then we encourage you to have a look at this in the break, or indeed to come back to the Institute at a later date to do so. On your chairs, you'll also found a handout produced by the IHR Digital Department, which highlights the bibliography of British and Irish history, one of the online resources we produce in association with the Royal Historical Society. On these handouts, we've chosen to represent in several different ways the publishing careers of 3 London historians, Helen Moore-Cam, Joan First, and Lisa Jardine. And we've distributed these various versions randomly across the room, so we ask you to exchange and confer with your neighbours if you'd like to collect the full set. And finally, of course, there is the new exhibition featuring portraits of 20 notable women historians active across the University of London from the first decade of the 20th century to the second decade of the 21st. These 20 images are now in place on the walls of the staircase going up from the IHR's main entrance, hung on either side of the existing portraits of the 11 former directors of the Institute. Alana and Laura will say more later about these portraits, their choosing and promotion. The portraits of the 11 directors were put up in 2014 to mark the opening of the newly refurbished IHR, and they represent an important dimension of the Institute and its history. But there are, of course, many other dimensions and stories to tell. So we're very pleased to have this opportunity to commemorate and help draw attention to the work and legacy of 20 more historians who shaped historical scholarship at the Institute, at institutions across London, including the IHR. In the first instance, this new exhibition will remain in place for the next 4 months and will, we hope, attract many other new visitors to the Institute. The portrait exhibition and today's event are also prompting the Institute to look ahead. Later this year, the IHR's annual Crichton Lecture, to be given by Professor Miri Rubin of Queen Mary, will consider the subject of diversity in medieval European cities. Meanwhile, the imminent appointment of an archivist for the IHR will allow us to better appreciate and study the contribution of the many scholars and students from across Britain and overseas who worked at the Institute, particularly during the interwar period. It's a project we hope will also intersect with digital research we're planning on the early generations of women who studied in London, research that coincides with the 150th anniversary of women's admission at classes at the university, which falls next year. And the new portraits exhibition is also prompting us to consider our own approaching centenary in 2021. It's our plan to incorporate and extend this new exhibition into a permanent display that will record the IHR's many dimensions and faces, past and present, and help further the Institute's national capacity and responsibility to reflect fully the interests, priorities and diversity of the historical profession now and in years to come. So welcome once again to the IHR, and now let me hand over to Laura and Alana.
Thank you very much, Philip, for welcoming everyone on behalf of the IHR. And thank you all for being here today. I think based on the kind of registration numbers, we're really pleased about the interest and support shown for this event, and we really anticipate it being a fruitful half day of discussion and reflection. Before we start with the programme, Alana and I wanted to say a few words about the inspiration behind the day. We won't talk now about the portraits outside, as we're going to kind of do a little bit of an introduction to that later on prior to the drink reception.
So the main impetus behind this event, from the perspective of the Department of History at King's College London, has been work that we've conducted over the last 18 months for our Athena SWAN Bronze Award submission, which happened in November 2016. I'll be speaking in much more detail about that process later on. One of the outcomes of this work was our regular bi-termly women's lunches in the department. And it was at one of these lunches that we first discussed the possibility of organising an event of this kind, initially for International Women's Day, on gender in the profession. And I have to say that Laura in particular provided the inspiration and the organisational energy to draw together this symposium. So her that we're here. As those of us gathered here well know, there's been a good deal of research and activity in this area in the last few years, and actually even longer than that if we look sort of back. And we've of course been inspired by the efforts of our colleagues at the Royal Historical Society and at Oxford through the Women in the Humanities initiative. The RHS report on gender equality published in 2015 highlighted the continuing structural barriers and unconscious bias that continues to pervade our institutions and to stymie the full potential of women in higher education. Following on from this report, the sold-out Challenging Inequalities workshop held at St Hilda's on the 14th of October last year fostered discussion about inequalities with the operation of the REF, the reliance on student feedback and the implications of TEF, issues of work-life balance, and the differential operation of inequalities dependent on seniority and the permanence of precarity distinction. The result of this gathering is a 6-point manifesto for change, which it is hoped will galvanise more imaginative and interventionist strategies. It's clear that we need more than good policies and their implementations, the theme I think of today. What is required is the more difficult realignment of gendered norms and attitudes. For as recent research conducted on academic women's experiences across the higher education sector shows, published recently in the Times of Higher Education in February, there is a persistent problem faced by women with the challenge of negotiating the biases embedded in acceptable norms of male and female behaviour. Behaviours such as networking, self-promotion, tenacity and being strategic are, apparently, considered undesirable in women. Yet it's widely acknowledged that these characteristics are essential parts of career progression within universities.
So with this emphasis on culture change and consciousness raising now being talked about within the profession of history quite urgently, at King's we were keen to hold an event that both spoke to them and addressed the development of specific cultures of history in the 20th century. Now, I started working at King's in September last year at the tail end of conducting my PhD research, which focuses on popular history and education in Britain in the 20th century. So I've therefore been thinking for a long time about gender and the making of history outside of the academy. And so I was kind of keen, or we were keen, to build this perspective into an event and an exhibition that thought critically about women historians across various professions. So we therefore, as you'll kind of see in the programme, decided to invite speakers to reflect upon this issue both in the past, in the present and in the future, with the panel from our colleagues about women historians at King's slotted in the middle. Now, this focus on institutions and on London is a deliberate attempt to draw attention not just to the intellectual output of women historians, but to the structures, networks and cultural contexts that have both sustained and constrained them. Now, in mentioning this, I'm deliberately nodding to the kind of foundational work around the Economic History Society's Women's Committee and conducted by Maxine Berg, Joan Thirsk and others in the 1980s and 1990s on women in early 20th century economic history. And that work really emphasised the role of networks, patrons and institutions in the careers of female historians. And so I suppose my hope is today will offer an opportunity to both revisit some of their arguments and observations, and also to begin to situate that story alongside the trajectories of women historians working across other disciplines and institutions. And so that's really all we have to say by way of introduction. So now we'll move on to our first panel.